tell, then you see the road. I'm out to my soul into the size whenever the smoke clear out of my face and my picture perfect. Do it. All of that green together, the truth, yeah. Tell you the
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to Cypherfics. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 7th part of, What If Harry Potter Meets High School DxD. Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of Asian Lion Heart 310 on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. You are free to come back anytime now, Harry-kun. And thank you for the wards. Yasaka inquired to the green-eyed young lord as she stood with her daughter, watching Harry's and Seraph's departure. 2 days had passed since Harry first met the Kitsunes and he had to admit he had enjoyed his time here. Yasaka was a kind and loving mother but also a dedicated leader for the Yukai faction. The powerful Kitsune was also polite and humble, but he discovered that she did possess a teasing side along with a flirtatious one. Since that first night, Yasaka would tease whenever she wanted by wiggling his melons when he looked at her, sending him stuck winks or literally pressing his head eye in her melons. Of course he was embarrassed each time she did this, but he didn't care as, being a 17-years-old young man almost 18, he clearly enjoyed the treatment. Seraph was no better. Whenever she wanted, the Mao Leviathan would try to steal him a kiss before giggling like a child who received an autograph from her favorite idol. He grew to like Leviathan very much as her childish behavior was really cute and enjoyable. Of course, it was also fun to show her some spells from the wizarding world. Also before going, he had also taught some little protection spells for Kunu in case she was in danger, and Yasaka had thanked him greatly for this as well as being so affectionate with her daughter. In addition, he decided to add a little protection around their domain and used some runes to create powerful wards which would protect everyone inside. They were especially key to protect Yasaka, Kunu, and some of her guards and servants she trusted the most. The leader of the Yukai faction had been overjoyed to hear this and again thanked him greatly for this. Thanks to this, Yasaka could not leave Kyoto whenever she wanted without having to worry about Kunu or her domain. Seraph had also been a great help as she poured some of her magic to strengthen the wards. Harry was curious on why Seraph wanted to have a meeting with Yasaka in the first place, and apparently it was to create a treaty between the Yukai faction and the Devil faction. Understanding that it was about politics, Harry decided to leave that to them. He wasn't a fan of politics, it was boring. The night before the present day, Harry had fun again with Yasaka and Seraph. Apparently, the latter wanted to enjoy him as much as possible because once he returned to Peveril Mansion, Seraph won't see Harry for a little while, which was understandable because of her position as Mao Leviathan. Yasaka, for her part, wanted to enjoy him one more time before he left while promising him that it won't be the last he would hear about her. He also had fun with Kunu. The younger Kitsune would play with him the second she left her lessons, and she was far too cute to say no. Harry was attached to little Kunu as she reminded him a bit of Asia, despite the former nun being a bit older. He liked to hear her laugh or having fun because from what Yasaka said, her daughter didn't have a lot of friends, more like none because of her position. Kunu would ask him to change into his lion form so she could resume the petting she gave him before, and he happily did so. He was a bit happy that Kunu wasn't afraid of his largest form, even if it was funny to see people's scared faces. Yes, he had a SDST side in him, blame it on Muerte and her lessons/torture sessions. It was my please Lady Yasaka. I mean Okayasan. Harry began to say before quickly changing his sentence when the Kitsune shot him a dangerous glare. For some reason, she liked to hear him calling her Okayasan better than using her normal name. Maybe it was her maternal side showing off. Who knows? Well then, have a good journey home, Harry-kun, Yasaka replied with a warm smile before shooting him a stuck lick while licking her lips. Seeing this, Harry blushed madly before looking over at Seraph, who seemed amused by this if her grinning face was any indications. Don't say a word. Harry sternly inquired the Mao, who giggled at him in response as she used her teleportation magic to send the two of them away from Yasaka's domain to Peveril Mansion. When the two disappeared, Kunu, who was a bit sad that her playmate was gone, turned her head to look at her mother. "Will we see Oni-san again, Mama?" Yasaka looked at her daughter with surprise as she literally called Harry, her older brother. "Harry-kun is Oni-san now, Kunu-chan?" Kunu blushed a bit but nodded in confirmation. Her mother smiled at her daughter before patting the top of Kunu's head affectionately, much to the younger Kitsune's delight. "Yes, we will see him again in the future, Kunu-chan. I know we will, and if he doesn't come to us we will come to him." "Do you know where he lives?" At her daughter's question, Yasaka opened her mouth to answer but then froze. She had completely forgot to ask his address. "No." Kunu sighed sadly but then froze as her eyes landed on something behind her mother, and Yasaka turned around to see a pink-haired young woman in a gothic attire stepping out of a portal made of shadow. "Who are you, stranger?" Yasaka asked the newcomer sternly as she stood protectively in front of her daughter. As she faced the new woman, she was wondering how Harry's wards didn't push her out. He had tried them himself and Seraphol putted some of her own magic in them. How could they didn't push this intruder out of her domain? "My name's Muerte, Harry's aunt." At those words, Yasaka flinched in shock as her eyes widened in fright as they looked at the newcomer who was smiling at her calmly. "If you are Harry-kun's aunt, then it means you are." "Yes, I am Death." Muerte inquired as she released a fraction of her dark aura while summoning her loyal scythe. Kunu whimpered as she looked at the stranger with wide eyes. She, like her mother, never thought she would meet Death herself. The young Kitsune had heard of Harry's story and knew that he was Death's nephew, but seeing the woman who practically raised her playmate, she was both scared and curious. "Milady, welcome in my domain," Yasaka inquired respectfully to the primordial deity with a small bow which was quickly imitated by Kunu. Muerte nodded at them before stepping closer. The two Kitsunes gulped slightly in fright when they saw Death herself approaching them, and Kunu couldn't stop herself from shivering in terror. When the pink-haired woman stopped in front of them, she smiled softly before calmly saying those words. "I saw what you did with Harry and I approves." Blinking a few times to be sure that she heard this right, Yasaka stayed silent as she listened to the newcomer's new words. "Hear the address of my dear nephew, one more girl around him might be good." Yasaka blushed slightly at the remark, even if deep down she was a bit shocked that she didn't manage to tell that the primordial being was around before. While she was deep in thought, Yasaka didn't notice Muerte smiling down at her daughter, who was trying to hide behind her mother with her eyes glued on the deity. "Cute kid." Kunu blushed madly after those words left the deity's mouth and hid her red face in her mother's clothes, much to the amusement of Muerte and Yasaka when she noticed. "I will leave you be now, good day," was the deity's last words before she disappeared in thin air. The two Kitsunes stayed silent for a moment, shocked by the fact they just met Death herself, but then quickly returned back to their home to change their minds, with Yasaka thinking about what she would do the next time she will see Harry-kun. Meanwhile, at Peveril Mansion, Harry was in bed being cuddled by Tiamat and Rainier. Seraphol left a few moments ago to go back to the underworld, but not without giving a deep kiss on the lips. Rainier was the first one to greet him by pulling the young lord into a passionate kiss. Then Tiamat came over and instantly pulled him into a tight embrace, with his head being smothered by her bust. The two had been bored without him around, so now that he was there they would pass as much time with him as possible. Tiamat literally dragged him to his room before he was forced on the bed by the two women who prevented him to leave by sandwiching him between them. He wanted Asia, Anne or Ravel to help him, but apparently they weren't there. Asia went to the occult research club, maybe to have some time with Issei the perv, while Ravel was in the underworld to see her parents. Harry internally slapped his face as now he was alone with a dragon king and a fallen angel who want nothing more than to hog him. Harry sighed deeply with a hint of annoyance as he was sandwiched by Tiamat and Rainier, but had to admit that he did miss being with them, albeit it was only for 2 days. As he was being cuddled by the two women, he couldn't help but thinking about how his life turned on until now, from the unloved freak of Privet Drive, beaten and abused by his relatives, to his actual life with friends and women who loved him. He was friendless at the beginning, and now, he had a lot of friends and allies. "A yen for your thought, Harry-kun?" Rainier asked him when she noticed his pensive look. Shaking his head, the green-eyed young lord turned his head to look at the fallen angel before replying with a soft smile, "I was thinking about how lucky I am." Rainier smiled back before kissing him on the lips, which he returned. When he pulled his lips away from Rainier's, another pair of lips passionately crashed against his and internally rolled his eyes as he kissed Tiamat back. Looked like he was stuck in bed until these two would release him. Time skip. Harry was sitting on a bench in a park with a content look on his face. He returned back from Yasaka's domain the day before, and the green-eyed young lord wanted to have some time to himself, so he went to take a walk around. Rainier and Tiamat wanted him to stay at home but understood that man sometimes need time for himself, so let him go. Yesterday afternoon, Asia and Ravel returned back home and, the moment they saw him, hugged him as tight as they could, happy that he was back. Then Rias and Sona entered the scene. Why? Because they were bringing back the books they borrowed from Harry, books of magic of course. The two heiresses were amazed by the wizard's branch of magic and wanted to learn as much as possible, and Harry had no objections. However, he was soon confronted by Sona, who had gave him a stern talk. Why, you might ask? Because of his relationship with her older sister, Seraphol. Harry had at first pleaded that it was the Mao who started it first, and the president of the student council did something that shocked him. She thanked him with a hug. Apparently, while she loved her older sister, Sona was still embarrassed when she was around because of how childish Seraphol was, which Harry could understand, and thought that now that the Mao Leviathan was in a relationship with Harry, she would become more serious. Of course, that didn't stop her from menacing Harry to cut his family jewels if he dared to hurt her older sister's feelings. The green-eyed young lord had promised her that he would never hurt Seraphol in any way possible. Sona had nodded her head, accepting his words, as so far he never broke a promise. Back to present, Harry was seating on a bench when he noticed a movement on his right and so turned his head to see what it was. It was a cat, an adorable black cat with hazel golden eyes. It mewed at him as it slowly approached the young man. "Hello there, little one," Harry called out to the cat when it stopped at his feet. He lowered his head down to scratch the cat behind its ears, earning a delighted purr from the little furball. Smiling, Harry slowly picked up the cat before putting it on his knees, where he started to pet it. Thanks to his therianthrope side, he could tell just by the smell that the cat was female, but there was also something off about her. She had the same scent that Kaniko's. As if it wasn't enough, there was a strange aura around her, one that shouldn't be around a normal cat. As he petted the little feline, Harry smiled at her before saying softly but also with an understanding tone, "Aren't you an adorable little fella, kitty? Or maybe I should call Kuroka." He had heard about Kaniko's older sister, Kuroka, who had killed her king and became a stray devil. It was because of Kuroka that Kaniko almost got executed and had refused to use senjutsu and yujitsu. The she-cat froze when those words left his mouth and looked up at him with wide eyes while he simply stared at her with a raised brow. Suddenly, the she-cat jumped out of his knees to land in front of him, and Harry watched as the feline turned into an appealing young woman with a voluptuous figure, long black hair with split bangs, and hazel gold eyes with cat-like pupils. On her head, Harry could see a pair of black cat ears and two black tails waving at her backside. Her attire consisted of a black kimono, a yellow obi, a set of golden beads, and an ornately detailed headband. The kimono itself featured a red interior and was open at her shoulders, giving view to her large melons. Harry briefly stared at them, but he could easily tell that Kuroka's melons could rival Rias's and Akeno's in terms of size. "Moo, how did you know it was me, Naya?" Kuroka inquired him with curiosity. "Your aura gave you away, oh, and you have the same scent that Kaniko's," Harry replied to the stray devil in a calm tone, but then his calm face turned in a more angry one as he added sternly, "Now I would like to know why you abandoned your own sister. And what would you have wanted me to do, Naya?" "I killed my king, Naya. I couldn't bring Chiron with me, Naya." Kuroka retorted in an angry tone as her eyes narrowed at him. "And pray tell, why did you kill your king in the first place? From what I heard, you became drunk by your own powers." "I killed him because he wanted to conduct tests on Chiron, Naya." Harry blinked at her answer, but then his eyes narrowed dangerously as he asked her, "Tests for what?" "He wanted to create a super devil, Naya. When I heard of this, I knew I couldn't let him hurt my amado Naya. Harry stared into her hazel golden eyes and was shocked to see nothing but sincerity. Now it made sense. While he couldn't perform senjutsu, he had made research on it, and from what Muerte told him, Nekashus never become obsessed by it. So hearing that Kuroka, a Nekashu, became drunk from her powers was really suspicious. I believe you and I will help you as best as I can, Harry inquired to Kuroka, who blinked in surprise as she stared at him with wide eyes. How will you do that, Naya? If I go back Tati Underworld, I will be killed on sight, Naya. Leave that to me, but first come. Harry inquired hurriedly before quickly going toward his home. At first hesitant, Kuroka went after him, hoping that this handsome young man would indeed help him. When they arrived at Peveril Mansion, the Nikusha gaped at the sight but then quickly shook her head to follow Harry as he entered the building. As she followed him, Kuroka couldn't help but looking around with amazement, as the place was truly appealing inside and out. Harry led the Nekachu toward an empty dark room where in the center of it, we could see a table with a strange shallow stone or metal basin on it. Kuroka looked at the object with some curiosity. On the metal were carved strange symbols which looked like runes, and there were also precious stones fitted in it. This is a pensieve. It's a very rare and powerful magical item generally used to review some memories, even the oldest ones. Harry explained to the Nekashu, whose eyes widened in shock as she stared at both him and the pensieve. Really? It can do that, Naya? Of course. And we will use it to review the memory of that day. The happiness in Kuroka's eyes warmed his heart, but then she hugged him tightly with her chest pressed against his. Thank you, Naya. No problem, but first we must talk with one of the Mao. She froze at those words, and Harry, noticing this, scratched behind her cat ears to calm her down. Don't worry, everything will be fine, Hedwig. Harry called out for his familiar, who appeared in the room in a burst of fire. Kuroka stared at the white royal phoenix with nothing but pure shock and watched as the majestic bird landed on a perch-like structure near Harry, who instantly petted its head with a smile on his face. Kuroka stared at the scene with disbelief but then blinked when Harry wrote something on a paper before hanging it on the bird's right leg. Hedwig. Go see Surzex and give him the message. It's important. The phoenix nodded at her human with a fire of determination in her eyes before glancing at the Nekachu, who flinched when she noticed the bird's gaze on her. Don't worry, she is a friend. Here's some bacons for you, girl, Harry inquired to his familiar, who looked away from Kuroka to look at him. Chuckling, Harry summoned some pieces of bacons before giving them to Hedwig, who wolfed down greedily. Singing loudly in content, the majestic bird then disappeared in a burst of flame, leaving behind a shocked Kuroka and a smiling Harry. The green-eyed young lord then turned his head to look at the Nekachu, whose hazel golden eyes were locked on him. This was my familiar Hedwig, if you want to know. You have a phoenix, a light creature, as your familiar, Naya? Yes. Kuroka stared at him with wide eyes, speechless. Harry chuckled at her gaping mouth, but then a red circle appeared nearby and Surzex Lucifer himself stepped out of it, looking grave. Lord Lucifer, Harry greeted the newcomer with a nod and a straight face. Lord Peveril, Surzex replied back in the same tone and a nod of his own along with a neutral look on his face. The two men then stared at each other in the eyes with silence, and Kuroka was growing a bit unnerved by how tense the air was. But then the two grinned as the corner of their mouths stretched a bit. Snickers then were heard before it became full loud laughs as the two enveloped each other's shoulders with an arm. Kuroka was dumbfounded as the scene of the Mao Lucifer laughing with a human and acting as if he was a friend. I needed that. Now Harry-kun, can you tell me why you wanted to see me for? Surzex asked the green-eyed young lord in a friendly manner after a moment of hilarity. If I wanted to see you, Surzex, it was mainly to discuss something important, Harry replied with a serious expression on his face. Which is? Her, Harry replied calmly as he turned his head to look at Kuroka, who flinched when Lord Lucifer looked at her. Well, look like you caught the SS Stray Devil, Tuju Kuroka, congratulations, but why have you called me then? Because apparently Kuroka here is a good reason to kill her king in the first place, Harry responded to the Mao Lucifer, who blinked at the unexpected answer. How can you tell, Harry-kun? Sirzex asked him with a serious look on his face as he glanced back and forth between Harry and Kuroka, who looked like she wanted to turn tail and run as fast as possible. Harry smirked at the Mao Lucifer before approaching the pensieve. Sirzex glanced at the item with a confused frown before looking back at the green-eyed young lord, waiting for an answer. Like I explained to the pretty Nekasha over there, this is a pensieve, a magical item used to review someone's memory, Harry briefly explained to Sirzex, whose eyes widened as he stared at the artifact with shock and amazement while Kuroka was blushing madly thanks to Harry's compliment. It can really do that? Yes, but if you don't believe me. No, it's just I never heard of such an artifact before now. I can understand so about the lovely lady here. I will try to have her case re-examined, but I want to see this pensieve of yours. Harry raised an eyebrow at the demand. It sounded like a child asking its mother for a candy. Shrugging, the green-eyed young lord turned his head to look at Kuroka, who had stayed silent the whole time. Can you come closer, please? The black-haired Nekasha nodded at him before stepping closer while glancing at the Mao Lucifer warily. Sirzex could understand why she was scared, so he tried his best to not look too intimidating, which failed. Harry smiled comfortingly at the Nekusha before summoning his wand, the Elder Wand in his hand. Sirzex eyed the object with attention as a darkish and strong power emanated from it. The object, who he could assume was a wand, had a smooth, unadorned and a handle formed from two conjoined spheres. Kuroka flinched when Harry placed the tip of the object against her temple but calmed down a bit at the sight of his smile. She didn't know why, but her instinct was screaming at her to trust him, and her instinct had never been wrong before. Don't worry, you won't get hurt, I promise, Kitty, Harry inquired to the Nekasha, who shot him a small glare at being called Kitty but didn't say anything. Then, to both Sirzex and Kuroka's amazement, when Harry withdrew his wand away, some silvery substance came away, stretching from the Nekasha's temple to the tip of the wand like a thick gossamer strand, which broke when Harry pulled the wand away from. Harry then gently lowered the silvery substance toward the pensieve before letting it falling in the magical item. Then the pensieve shined with a bright silvery light similar to the strange substance Harry extracted from Kuroka's temple. In appearance, it looked cloud-like, and was moving ceaselessly like waves. Sirzex and Kuroka stared at the pensieve with wide eyes before looking back at Harry, who seemed amused by their faces. What did you do? The Mao Lucifer asked the young lord with confusion and curiosity, while Kuroka looked at Harry with pure curiosity in her hazel golden eyes. The silver thing I extracted from Kuroka's head was her memory, not all her memory but the one we are interested in. So. What now? You and I can take a look at her memory, or you can either summon the other Mao to watch it here, your choice. Sirzex stayed silent for a moment. He still felt bad for what happened a long time ago, mainly the massacre of the Nekakis in the underworld, and wanted to at least do some good. If this pensieve, as Harry-kun called it, could reveal what truly happened that day, maybe some things could be clarified. How do you see the memory? It's pretty easy, all you have to do is touching the substance, Harry responded with a small shrug. Blinking at the answer, Sirzex then shrugged to hide his skepticism and slowly putted a finger into the silvery substance. While the Mao Lucifer was busy with the memory, Harry turned his head to look at Kuroka, whose face was inches away from his. Can I help you, Kuroka? Do you think this will work, Naya? Kuroka asked him with a hint of nervousness as she glanced at the Lucifer's unmoving body. We will see, Harry replied calmly as he summoned a chair to sit on before summoning a book. Kuroka was speechless as she stared at the green-eyed young lord before her. He had just used a type of magic she had never heard before. Many questions were entering her, like, who was he? Or, what was he? She promised silently to herself to ask him some questions later once the Mao Lucifer will not be around anymore. Speaking of Sirzex, a loud gasp could be heard once he returned back to the world of the livings before turning his head to look at Harry, who was sitting on a chair and reading a book. So what do you think, Sirzex? Harry asked him with a small grin as he stared at Rias's big brother. I will make sure her case will be re-examined. I will summon the other Mao to discuss this matter. Harry nodded at Lord Lucifer before the two of them looked toward Kuroka, who froze again when the Mao looked back at her. Tuju Kuroka, I promise on my position as Mao Lucifer, to make sure your case will be re-evaluated. Kuroka bowed in front of the red-haired man who nodded back at her before looking at Harry. Harry-kun, your pensieve is really interesting, I must admit. How much for it? I'm sorry Sirzex, but as I told you earlier, pensieves are very rare and beside only I know how to use one at the moment, so, Harry began to say before adding when he saw the disappointed look on the Mao's face, but if you want to use it in the future, then you can ask. Thank you Harry-kun, now I must take my leave, good day. Sirzex inquired to the green-eyed young lord before disappearing through his red magic circle, leaving Harry and Kuroka behind. Well, look like everything will be good for YHMMPHF. Harry began to say to the Nekasha before he found himself being pulled into a tight hug with his head sandwiched between a pair of melons. Thank you for this, Naya. Kuroka cried out in joy as she hugged the handsome young man who was squirming to escape her grasp. You're welcome, but please let me breath. Harry yelled loudly, and Kuroka, noticing his struggling, released her hold on him. The green-eyed young lord gasped loudly as he tried to breath, but then he gave a small glare at the Nekasha who looked back at him sheepishly. I'm sorry for that, Naya. It's fine, he mumbled with a blush on his face. What was it with women smothering his face with their melons? Sadly for him, his red face didn't go unnoticed by a certain Nekasha who approached him before rubbing her backside against his PP. You like this, don't you, Naya? Kuroka. Harry cried out in embarrassed as he tried his best to restrain his hormones. The black-haired Nekasha giggled in amusement at his face, and Harry sent her a small glare, but it only caused her to laugh loudly, not affected in the slightest. As if it wasn't enough, he heard footsteps coming from the room entrance and looked up to see Rainier entering the place. The fallen angel froze at the front door when she saw Harry with a strange woman she never saw before and looked back and forth between them. A new girl for your HRM, Harry-kun? Rainier asked the green-eyed young lord teasingly. Rainier. It's not what you think. Harry screamed back at the fallen angel with a face as red as a strawberry. Oh. Then why are you blushing? DMNU Rainier. The fallen angel laughed loudly in response while Harry glared daggers at her with a red face mixing anger, embarrassment and annoyance. Kuroka, for her part, was also blushing, but deep down she wouldn't mind having a relationship with this young man who had just helped her. Maybe in the future they would be together, only time will tell. Time skip. Harry was concerned. He had received a message from Rias who wanted him to come at the Occult Research Club as fast as possible. A few days had passed since he helped Kuroka, and from time to time, the black-haired Nekasha would come by and visit him while relentlessly helping her. He had also made sure to hide this from Kaneko, his favorite little Otoko, as it wanted this to be a surprise. Sirzex Lucifer had kept his promise and secretly reopened Kuroka's case so it could be re-examined. The Lucifer of course didn't shut his mouth and told his fellow Maos about his pensieve and how it worked. The next day, he had been confronted by none other than Seraphol, who wanted to buy his item. Of course, he told her the exact same thing that he did with the Mao Lucifer, and it was pretty funny to see her pouting face. However, he had been later summoned by the 4 Maos so they could watch this pensieve together. He even got to meet another Mao, Ajuka Beelzebub. Knowing that normally they were 4, he asked them where was the last one, and they all shrugged, clearly showing that they didn't know. Harry then showed them how to use the pensieve, and it was needless to say that both Seraphol and Ajuka were fascinated by it after they all went back to reality. The other Maos, after seeing the memories, promised to help as best as they could, as it seems Kuroka was wrongly judged for her action. A part of Kuroka, things were good until Issei told him that Kiba had started to act strangely recently. The green-eyed young lord was wondering what could have gotten the blonde like this and tried to confront the guy who ignored him totally. Well, at first, because after Harry menaced him to tell Tsubaki, Kiba decided to tell him his dream about him fighting some exorcist named Freed who had a fragment of the holy sword, Excalibur. Harry, knowing of the blonde's terrible past, promised him to help him if he needed some, and Kiba wholeheartedly accepted. However, it didn't stop him from growing distant to everyone, as if he had completely forgotten his promise. Speaking of strange things, recently at Kuo, Harry felt a holy-like aura coming from somewhere and had tried to investigate, but each time he went toward where it came from there was nothing. The green-eyed young lord then had thought that maybe he was imagining things, so he ignored it the next time he felt it. He should listen to his instinct. That's bring us back to present. Harry was finishing homeworks when he received a message of Rias inquiring him to come to the occult research clubroom as fast as possible. Normally he would have used a port key, but he was in such a hurry that he totally forgot about it. He just told Rainier and Tiamat that the house was theirs for now before he rushed outside without waiting for their answers. Now here he was walking toward the old building that was the clubroom of the occult research club. He was about to knock on the door to reveal his presence when he heard someone speaking inside and pressed his ear against the door to hear better. He didn't recognize the speaker though, but it was feminine, that's for sure. "Tell me, do you still believe in God?" The one who responded, however, he recognized instantly. It was Asia, and she sounded sad. "Yes, I still do. Even with all that's happened, he is still in my heart." Asia's answer sounded not only sad but also like she was trying her best to not cry. Harry hated it when Asia was sad, and he couldn't help but feeling a bit angered at whoever caused this. Of course, his rage doubled when he heard whoever Asia was speaking with saying those next words. "If that's the case, then allow me to end your life for not only using your power to heal a devil but also for becoming one yourself and betraying him." That was the last straw. With a cry of pure rage, Harry broke the door, startling the people inside, who all looked at him with wide eyes of fear at the sight of his glowing eyes. The green-eyed young lord, then the entire member of Rias's peerage, along with two people he didn't recognize. The first one was a peeling young woman with violet eyes, long chestnut hair tied into twin tails, with each of them held with a blue scrunchie. The second intruder, who was currently facing Asia, was a young woman with chin-length blue hair with a dyed green fringe on the right side and dark yellow eyes. The latter, like the former, was wearing a black, skin-tight, short-sleeve leotard with pauldrons, matching fingerless gloves that extend to her biceps, and thigh-high boots, all of which were adorned with straps. This attire was worn under a white hooded cloak with gold and blue accents. Both of them also had a crucifix around their neck. In the blue-haired girl's hand was a large, uniquely shaped broadsword with a blue blade and a golden edge. It had a semicircular guard on the left side of the handle that extends to the bottom just above the pommel, with a small extension on the right side of the handle. In addition, the weapon looked slightly taller than its owner. Harry then glared daggers at the blue-haired girl as his eyes glowed with power. "Touch Asia and it would be the last thing you do." Harry threatened her with a growl-like voice. The Occult Research Club, seeing his current state, backed away slightly while the two intruders stood their grounds, especially the blue-haired girl, who glared daggers at the newcomer. "And who are you to prevent me from doing what is right? Your executioner if you keep talking like this." "Oh. Do you really think a lowly devil like yourself can go to war against the church?" To her shock, Harry laughed loudly, but then her shock turned into anger as she asked him furiously. "Why are you laughing?" "Because you believe I'm a devil, that's why." Blinking, the blue-haired girl was about to say something, but her comrade stepped forward. "If you are not a devil, then what are you?" Harry shot her a devious grin before answering calmly. "My name Harry Peveril and I am Death's nephew." Ash said those last words. He unleashed a good portion of his aura, with his body completely covered in shadow and his eyes completely glowing in a greenish color. The two girls froze as those words left his mouth, while the Occult Research Club couldn't help but smirking in amusement as they watched the scene. "Death's nephew?" The chestnut-haired girl asked him with disbelief as she shivered with fright and shock. "Am I stuttering?" Harry asked the devils, who shook their heads. "That's what I thought." "Prove it. Prove it you're really Death's nephew." The blue-haired girl inquired him haughtily. She was acting as if she was a queen. Noticing this, Harry smirked mischievously, and the sight of this caused some devils to gulp in fright except Akeno, who licked her lips as if she instinctively knew what was going to happen. "As you wish, your majesty." As he shouted the last words, he unleashed his full aura, causing everyone present to fall on their knees because of the pressure. The two newcomers tried to fight back, but it was no use, and they stared up at him with terror and fright as he stood before them. The devils, for their parts, were annoyed to have to support the pressure again. A part of Akeno, who was rubbing her thighs together, clearly turned on by it. "Please stop." The chestnut-haired girl cried out to him as she looked up at him. "I'm sorry for doubting you," the blue-haired one added with equal fear. "Good," Harry mumbled as he went back to normal with his aura sealed again inside his body. With the pressure gone, everyone could finally breathe, even if Akeno was pouting at Harry for stopping her fun. He shot her a small wink before glaring back down at the two girls who were now back on their feet. "Now can we all speak like civilized people? Or do I have to do this again?" Everyone quickly answered for the former question, while Akeno was the only one who wanted him to use the pressure again. "There, what it's so difficult?" he said while glaring at the two girls before turning his head to look at a certain former nun. "Are you alright, little one?" "I'm okay, Oniai-san," Asia replied as he gave him a small hug around his waist. The two intruders flinched as they realized why the green-eyed young man was so angry a moment ago, and the chestnut girl sent a small glare at her comrade, who returned into with a look that clearly said, "How could I have known?" "Now can you please tell me what the hell is going on?" Harry asked everyone with narrowed eyes as a small growl rumbled through his throat, while Asia looked up at her Oniai-san with a concerned look on her face. The rest of the devils and the intruders all flinched a bit at the harsh tone and the growl before glancing at each other worriedly. "Well, I am Shidu Irina and this is Quarta Zenobia. We are exorcists and we are also in mission for the church," the chest-haired girl inquired to the green-eyed young lord with nervousness. Harry looked back and forth between the two before sighing. "And what is this mission exactly?" He was ready for many things but not what was said next. Irina wasn't the one who responded, as the pleasure was given by Zenobia, who replied in a calm and serious tone. "Something had been stolen from the church. We are here to retrieve them." "And what exactly are you looking for?" Harry asked them with narrowed eyes as he crossed his arms. "The Excalibur swords," Irina replied after a moment of silence as he stared up at the green-eyed young man before her. "Wizarding World, England, Potter's Manor. Has anyone of you found him?" Albus Dumbledore asked the Order of the Phoenix once they all gathered around him. "So far nothing, Albus," like the lad vanished in thin air. Alastair Moody responded gruffly as he looked at the old wizard. "One thing is sure, he isn't in Europe anymore. We looked everywhere," Mundungus inquired from his seat. "He is not in America, that's for sure. Same for Africa," another member added with a deep sigh of frustration. "What about Australia?" Lily asked everyone with some hope in her tone. "The government there was formal. There is no one with the name Harry Potter on their territory. And even less with the description we gave them." Arthur Weasley responded softly while shaking his head. "That's leave us with Asia then," Albus commented as he rubbed his head as if he was getting a headache. "We already started to look there, Albus. Some people had been sent in Russia and India, so far nothing in those countries," Alastair replied to the old wizard. "What about in the east part of Asia? Or in Indonesia?" Lily asked them with a look of worry in her green eyes. "The people we sent there hadn't returned yet," Alastair responded to the worried mother with a scowl on his scarred face. Lily pressed her head into her hands as her heart was filled with nothing but remorse and shame. It had been some months since that dreadful day Voldemort revealed that her son Jacob Potter wasn't the one he marked as his equal, and that it was their eldest son, Harry, who was. At first the Potters were shocked and horrified by the news, as they gave up their eldest because, from what Dumbledore said that night 17 years ago, Harry was a squib. James had been the one who wanted to get rid of him first because squibs were considered as burden for magical families, but Lily had refused giving him up. Albus then said that even if Harry stayed with them, he would surely get jealous of his brother's fame and that such things would lead him into a dark path. Again Lily refused to give him up. As for her, it was unjust and stupid to give up a child for such idiocies. But when Albus again gently inquired her that Harry would become an easy target for vengeful Death Eaters, she reluctantly accepted. Sirius, Harry's godfather/dogfather, was totally against giving up his godson and was willing to take him in despite Harry being a squib. Sadly he couldn't, as Dumbledore stunned him with a petrifying spell. The old wizard erased some memory especially of what was said and done that night, but it was futile. The few days after abandoning Harry to the Dursleys, Sirius surprisingly regained that part of his memory and cut all ties with the Potters. Back to present, the Order of Phoenix, led by Dumbledore, sent people all around the world to find the missing Potter who wasn't a Potter anymore. Harry had apparently cast himself magically out of his family before disappearing. A part of the Potters, Dumbledore, Minerva and Alastor, no one knew of the truth. Speaking of which, Minerva McGonagall had been acting cold around her former students because she was still not happy that they gave up their child so easily to take care of Jacob, who was possibly one of her best students but also the most troublesome one after the Weasley twins. Back on topic, no matter where they sent people, they always came back empty-handed with no location of the missing Potter. Lily was becoming more and more worried as she wanted to see Harry again to tell him how ashamed she was of what she did abandoning him, while James wanted to convince his eldest to at least give up some of his titles, especially Slytherin, as he said, and I quote, "No child of man will be a Slytherin." Albus too wanted to find Harry, but for different reasons. He wanted to correct the mistake he did the night Voldemort was vanquished. He now realized what error he made that night. When he saw Harry's almost empty core, he assumed that it was because he was weak, but now that he thought about it, it made sense. If Harry's magical core was empty, it was because he just used it against Voldemort. The old wizard had cursed his own stupidity when he realized his mistake, and since then had sent a lot of people around the world to find Harry. In his head, the boy must be found for the greater good. He wasn't the only one out there looking for Harry. Voldemort and his Death Eaters were equally looking for the boy. But not only, as there was a third party looking for the missing boy, a third group composed of Sirius, Nymphadora, Don't Call Me That, Black Tonks and Remus. The third party also wanted to find Harry, but to warn him of what was going on in the wizarding world and what was planned for him. We must keep searching. The Dark Lord's forces are growing as we speak. James inquired to the rest of the order with a straight face. James is right, Harry must be found. Without him, we cannot win the war. Albus replied in agreement of James' words. I still don't think we need that boy. Squib or not, he is just a boy. Mundungus retorted with a scowl as he glared at Albus, who shot him a dangerous glare that sent shivers down everyone's spines. Harry is the only one who can defeat Voldemort. The old wizard ignored the flinches coming from some people around him when he said the Dark Lord's name. The prophecy was clear about it: either must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. While the adults were discussing, somewhere else in Potter Manor, a certain red-haired boy with hazel eyes was glaring daggers at an old picture which represent a happy Potter family, one where we could see two babies. Jacob Potter glared at the picture with nothing but pure hatred, especially at the baby in his mother's arms who was his twin brother, Harry. I don't know where you are, brother, but when I find you I will kill you and make you pay for stealing what is mine. Jacob declared with a snarl before tossing the picture away as if it was trash. Jacob, mate, are you okay? The furious former boy who lived turned his head to see his best friend Ron entered the room along with Hermione and Ginny, his precious girlfriend. The latter instantly went to comfort him as if she sensed his state, while his friends sat at each side of him. I'm fine, Ron, I'm just having another bad day. I don't care what people said, we all know it's you, the true boy who lived, not that brother of yours. The Weasley boy declared in an attempt to comfort his friend, who shot him a thankful smile. Thanks guys, I know I can always count on you. That's what friends are, Hermione retorted with a shrug, and they all shared a brief laugh, the previous conversation momentarily forgotten as they chatted with each other like normal young adults. Time skip. Meanwhile, in Japan, things were being a bit chaotic at Koho Academy with Harry and his friends. Why? For many reasons. After the visit of the church's representatives, Zenobia and Irina, things had become really interesting. Harry, Issei, and Kiba associated themselves with the two exorcists to find the stolen Excalibur swords. Later, they were helped by the Student Council and the Occult Research Club, and they discovered who stole the swords in the first place. Someone who had been exiled from the church and was the lead researcher of the Holy Sword Project. Someone Kiba swore to take revenge on. His name, Valper Galilei, a short, bespectacled elderly man with gray hair, a mustache, black eyes, who wore a priest outfit. They also fought some guy named Fried Selzen, a crazy exorcist who had worked with Rainier in the past to steal Asia's sacred gear. As if it wasn't enough, someone else entered the game. It was a fallen angel, but he looked different than the rest of his kind. It was a man with long black hair and red eyes along with pointy ears, which Harry comically commented that he looked like an elf. In addition, this guy possessed 5 pairs of black feathery wings. The guy in question was named Kokobeel, one of the 2 leader of the fallen angel faction and one who wanted to recreate a war between the 3 faction, as he believed that the fallen angels were the strongest of them all. But apparently, Azazel was someone who wanted peace, something Kokobeel didn't like. As if it wasn't enough in the equation, they all discovered something that shocked them to the core: the God of the Bible was dead, killed during the last war. Irina, Zenobia and Asia were shocked, horrified and saddened by the news. Harry had never been so angry at the sight of the former nun's tearful face. Together, after Kokobeel and Fried left the scene, they returned back to Kuo Academy to wait for the coming fight. The devils managed to cover the entire school with a protective barrier to prevent it damages. Irina, one of the exorcists, wasn't in good condition to fight as she had been injured previously. Zenobia, was eager to fight, and they all knew that Kiba, while being as silent as a tomb, was just as prepared for the coming battle. It didn't take long for the treacherous fallen angel to come, but he wasn't alone. Fried was there along with a large group of fallen angels. Everyone fought the intruders and a large 3-headed dog summoned by Kokobeel. Wait, a 3-headed dog? Yes, it was Cerberus, the guardian of hell, Hades' pet. The treacherous fallen angel summoned him, and now Issei was fighting it with his balance breaker along with Kaneko, who decided to help him while the others were taking down the fallen angels and tried to guess who had the misfortune to fight against Kokobeel. The answer was so easy to guess, as we all know how much luck and fate hated his guts. Can't you stop moving? Kokobeel inquired his opponent as he delivered blows after blows, but unable to even scratch the green-eyed boy before him. The treacherous fallen angel was fighting Harry in the air. The young lord had summoned his shadowy wings so he could fight Kokobeel like equals. Nope, Harry responded to the mad guy with a grin as he dodged another blow aimed at his head before adding cockily, "Is that all you got, Kokobeel? Because I'm bored here." Bored? I will teach you some respect, boy. Harry sighed as he dodged every punch and strike the furious fallen angel was sending him. He wanted to try his opponent and judge his fighting skills. So far he was disappointed, to say the least. Kokobeel, just as he arrived, had attacked him, as apparently he had felt his aura some time ago and wanted to fight whoever unleashed it. Harry had slapped his face with a hand as he remembered what he did the day he beaten up a certain frying turkey. Grumbling something about being a careless idiot, which he was, he returned back to his current situation. Kokobeel, how are you going to do that, huh? You can't even touch me. Harry taunted him with a smirk as he looked at his opponent. Hag. Kokobeel yelled in rage as he charged his opponent with a light sword in his right hand. The sound of clashing metal echoed in the air as Kokobeel and Harry faced each other, with the latter having blocked the fallen angel's attack with the sword of Gryffindor. The young lord ignored completely what was happening around him as he was only focused on the treacherous monster in front of him. Kokobeel's arrogance was similar to Riser, but unlike the Phoenix prick, the fallen angel wanted war for his own selfish reasons, and that's enraged him even more. Back to present, the two of them were struggling to push the other back as their swords were right in front of them while their eyes were locked on each other's. However, Harry decided that enough was enough and gathered all his strength to violently push his enemy back. Come on, overgrown crow. Show me what you got. Harry taunted him as he went into defensive position. Kokobeel's red eyes narrowed at the young man in front of him before lunging forward with a battle cry. Harry dodged to the right before swinging his sword to strike his enemy, who paired the blow with his own weapon. Gritting his teeth in frustration and anger at seeing the grin on his enemy's face, Harry swung his sword again, and the moment Kokobeel was about to pair it, the green-eyed young lord ducked his sword before slashing his enemy in the belly. Gasping in pain, Kokobeel backed away while examining his injury. It wasn't much, but it was still painful. Glaring daggers at the young man in front of him, the treacherous fallen angel lunged again like a mad animal, and he and Harry attacked each other fiercely with their respective swords, ignoring the fact they were observed. The green-eyed young lord had to admit that his opponent was an excellent swordman, even greater than his old sensei Masahiro. At the reminder of his deceased mentor, Harry's heart clenched in pain but still shook his head to focus on his opponent, whose attacks were becoming more and more violent. Kokabeel really wanted to kill him. With a battle cry, Harry swung his sword to his enemy's right, and the second Kokabeel blocked it with his own sword. The green-eyed young lord delivered a strong punch aimed at his belly. Groaning in pain, Kokabeel fled a few feet away, holding his stomach in pain, while Harry stood there, flapping his shadowy wings as he stared at his enemy with an emotionless face. "I have to give you credit, boy, you are good, but unfortunately for you I am better," the treacherous fallen retorted arrogantly as he stared at his opponent before doing something that surprised his opponent greatly. Kokabeel used his hands to create a large spear made of light, but it wasn't what shocked Harry, it was its size. The spear was as big as a building, if not more. Harry instantly knew that he couldn't block it with his sword, so in summoned it as his green eyes narrowed at the spear. "Feel the power of the greatest fallen angel. Die!" Kokabeel yelled loudly with arrogance before launching his gigantic spear at Harry, who made no move to dodge it. Harry was so focused on the spear that he didn't notice the alarmed cries coming his friends below as he spread his arms just as the spear was a foot away from him. Kokabeel smirked as he thought that he won. But then blinked in shock when he saw his spear crashing against a transparent, glass-like barrier made of pure light appearing in front of his weapon and his enemy. His shock turned into anger when he saw his weapon chattering after a few seconds of contact with their strange barrier. "What did you do? What sorcery is this?" Kokabeel asked his opponent with fury as he charged another light spear, but thankfully not as big as the precedent one. "It's for me to know and for you to find out," Harry replied back mockingly as he smirked at his opponent. He completely ignored the groans or the snickers coming from the background. The treacherous fallen angel growled in pure anger as he glared daggers at his enemy who dared to mock him, the great Kokabeel. With a cry filled with rage and hatred, he turned around to look at some fallen angels, the few who weren't killed by the devils. "My brothers and sisters. Kill this human who dared to oppose us." They didn't hesitate one bit as they all charged Harry with light weapons in their hands. Harry Kun/Atoko. The Occult Research Club and the Students' Council screamed in alarm as they watched the scene from the distance. However, the green-eyed young lord wasn't worried as he raised his hands in the air. Suddenly, his hands glowed brightly and even his eyes turned completely green as he stared at Kokabeel and his charging group of fallen angel. "Fallen angels. Have a taste of true light?" he inquired them loudly before thrusting his arms forward. Instantly, to everyone's shock, hundreds of comet-like projectiles made of pure bright light shot toward the charging fallen angels, who barely had the time to blink as they were obliterated on the spot. Kokabeel thankfully wasn't in the trajectory of he would have met the same fate that his followers. As he dodged his enemy's attack, he had unconsciously summoned his sword. How is that possible?" Kokabeel asked out loud to himself once the attack stopped, and he stared in shock as he saw that there was nothing left of his followers. Harry couldn't help but resenting a certain satisfaction at seeing the shock on his opponent's face as he looked toward him. "What will you do now, Kokabeel? Sending more of your dogs to me?" the green-eyed young lord asked the treacherous fallen angel, whose face turned from shock to anger in a mere second. "You will pay for what you did." Kokabeel screamed with fury as he charged at his enemy while creating a spear of light as big as him. Harry sighed deeply in annoyance as he turned his hand into fists before charging them as they found themselves wrapped by shadows. Then with a battle cry, he swiftly sent his fists forward, shooting two large balls of shadow which headed straight toward their target, who stopped a moment to stare at the upcoming attack. Before screaming in pain as the ball of shadows touched him. Without giving him the time to react, Harry rushed toward his enemy while gathering some of his energy into his left hand. When he was close to his enemy, he sent his hand forward just as a powerful blast of pure light shot out of it before going toward Kokabeel, who barely had the time to recover from the previous attack as the ball of light crashed against him. Screams of agony echoed in the air as the treacherous fallen angel found himself surrounded by a bright light. Harry watched the scene with an impassive look on his face and eyes as he completely ignored the cries coming from his enemy. When the light died, Harry could see the damage Kokobeel endured. His clothes were pretty much destroyed or greatly ripped apart, and from his 5 pairs of wings, only 2 remained. The other 3 had without contest be destroyed. "I cannot lose to a mere child," Kokobeel managed to say between his teeth as he looked up at his opponent, who was simply staring at him. "I am not a mere child, Kokobeel. I am Death's nephew, remember?" Harry retorted back with mock dignity as he crossed his arms over his chest. At those words, Kokobeel's eyes narrowed at him in anger as he snarled at his enemy. Before all of this happened, he had heard rumors that Death herself had a nephew and had been curious about this strange man and wanted him to join his cause, but then discovered that he was already allied with the devils. Not only there were rumors, but he, like Yasaka and Azazel, had felt the strong and powerful aura unleashed some time ago. When he first met the boy earlier, he had been shocked to see that this young man possessed such a strong aura in him, even if he managed to lock it inside his corpse, but refused to show any weaknesses as he already believed that he could fight against the boy. Looked like he had severely underestimated his enemy, who was now standing there, unharmed, while him, the great Kokobeel, was injured and exhausted. "Whatever you are, I won't let you destroy my plan," the treacherous fallen angel shouted defiantly before gathering his last strength to charge his enemy. Harry stared at him with an expression that clearly said, "Are you serious?" before sighing deeply. "I wanted to spare you so you could be judged for your actions, but you give me no choice." As those words escaped his lips, his eyes were closed as he concentrated on gathering some of his energy between his hands, which create a large yellow ball. Kokobeel was so blinded by his rage that he completely ignored what his opponent was doing until opponent's eyes reopened to reveal 2 emerald orbs glowing brightly as the ball of energy between his hands was as big as a soccer ball. The treacherous fallen angel froze at the sight of this and looked at his enemy, who had a stern and cold expression on his face as he looked at him. "Begone!" Harry cried out in a growl-like tone as he released the ball. In the form of a gigantic shock wave. However, from Kokobeel's point of view, everything was different. For starter, he was now surrounded by complete darkness, as in front of him, charging him with bared teeth, was a lion. But not any lion, a gigantic black-furred lion with emerald eyes. The treacherous fallen angel watched this with shock and disbelief, but when the feline was about to reach him, he just had the time to say one simple word. "SHT." Then screams of pain and agony followed this, and his body was slowly being consumed by Harry's attack. His remaining wings were now completely destroyed and slowly his body was turning into dust. However, the screams slowly died down as Kokobeel's head slowly disappeared into atoms. The last thing he had on his face was an expression of acceptance as he closed his eyes, waiting for death to claim him. Harry maintained his attack for a few more seconds before stopping. Looking at the place Kokobeel stood a few seconds ago, Harry couldn't help but shaking his head in disappointment. Thanks to Muerte's training sessions, more like torture sessions, he grew to like fighting, and sometimes he also blamed his lion side for that. Glancing one last time at where Kokobeel disappeared, the green-eyed young lord flied down to the ground before facing his friends who were rushing toward him as his shadowy wings slowly disappeared in thin air. The Battle of Koho Academy was over. Time skip. After the death of Kokobeel, Harry had been swarmed by his friends who congratulated him for what he did, along with asking him about his light power. Not long after the treacherous fallen angel died, someone else entered the scene. It was the wielder of Albion, the White Dragon Emperor, and the nemesis of Drake, the Red Dragon Emperor. Harry had heard from Muerte a long time ago about the rivalry between the 2 heavenly dragons and knew that it would be futile to convince the 2 to stop fighting. However, before they could question the newcomer of who he was, he disappeared as his only mission was to retrieve Kokobeel. But before leaving, the wielder of the White Dragon inquired Issei to become stronger so their fight would be more entertaining. He also bowed in respect for the green-eyed young lord, and Harry instinctively returned the gesture before the unknown White Dragon Emperor disappeared. After the fight, they had to clean what had been destroyed before enjoying a peaceful rest. Not long after the battle, Zenobia and Irina, who had left back to the church to reveal what they saw and did, returned back to Kuo as they were kicked out of the church for discovering the truth. Zenobia then became Rias's second knight alongside Kiba, while Irina became an angel reincarnated by one of the seraphs. Later, Harry had been really embarrassed when he heard that someone was cosplaying in the gymnasium of Kuo Academy, and imagine his shock when it was revealed that the person in question was none other than Seraphol Leviathan. It was the most embarrassing moment since he entered Kuo Academy. Scratch that, it was the second most embarrassing moment, the first being the day Muerte teased him in front of Ophis the day they met. Thankfully it wasn't only him who was embarrassed, apparently Sona was as well, and Rias. From what he heard, videos had been taken that day and Rias had been embarrassed by a comment her older brother Surzex made after viewing them. He didn't dare asking the Mao what it was, even if deep down he wanted to ask so he could tease Rias a bit more. As if it wasn't enough, Harry got to meet Rias' second bishop, who was apparently sealed because he couldn't control his power. Harry and Issei got to meet the one in question, and they were surprised to see a girl with platinum blonde hair and pinkish-violet eyes whose hair was styled in short bob cut with several small fringes over his forehead along with pointed ears. At least they both thought it was a girl because the person was wearing the female school uniform, but they were wrong. It had been funny to slap Issei when the perv thought it was a girl, and it was funnier to see his pale face when the truth of his gender was revealed. The person they thought was a girl was in reality an androgynous-looking male named Gasper Vladi. Issei tried to touch the guy, who seemed scared at this point, but then Gasper accidentally froze the time. Harry was the one who comforted the girl-looking boy, and it was thanks to him that Gasper unfroze the time. Rias then revealed to them that Gasper possessed a sacred gear named Forbidden Baylor View, and it was because of his inability to control it that he was sealed in the room. Harry slapped himself on the head, wondering how come he didn't sense him, as they were practically in the old school building. Even worse, when he got a good look at Gasper, he instantly realized that the girl-looking boy looked like a vampire. Of course he asked Rias about it, and she told him that Gasper was a damper, a hybrid born from the union of a vampire and a human. Then Rias, Akeno, Kiba left the room to help preparing the meeting between the three factions. Wait, what? Yes, apparently, after Kokobil's actions, Surzex thought it was time for the three factions to meet each other to discuss a peace treaty between them. Harry, for his part, decided to stay behind along with Issei, Kaneko and Asia to help Gasper in his training. Harry was teaching him of how to calm down and accept the power he possessed, as it was a part of him when someone else entered the room. It was a tall man appearing to be in his 20s with an average build, black hair, golden bangs and black goatee. He presented himself to be Azazel, the leader of the Fallen Angel faction and a friend of Surzex apparently. The man taught Issei, Harry, and Gasper how to control the latter's sacred gear before taking Harry aside to discuss. So you are Death's nephew? It's a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance, Azazel said to Harry with respect in his tone. I would say the pleasure is mine, but I would be lying from what I saw so far. You can't even keep an eye of your own subordinates, and look what happened because of it. The green-eyed young lord replied back with a hint of anger in his tone. To my defense, I didn't even know what Rainier planned back there, and if I knew I would have punished her accordingly, but now that she is dead I cannot do it anymore, Azazel inquired with a deep sigh full of regret. Rainier is not dead. She lives in my home, Harry replied nonchalantly. Seriously? Azazel asked him back with disbelief and shock at the news. How come he wasn't told about this? Yes, and from what I see so far, she is far happier now than she was before, Harry responded tartly with a small frown. Azazel had stayed silent at this, unable to say anything. Taking this as a sight of going on, Harry opened his mouth to speak again. As if it wasn't enough, you cannot even see that your fellow leader was plotting behind your back. What was more important than keeping an eye on your kind? Azazel flinched at the harsh tone as he felt nothing but guilt and shame. After all, what the young man in front of him said was true. Because of his lack of responsibility and his obsession on sacred gears, fallen angels were now seen as troublemakers. You are right, because of me and my lack of seriousness, bad things happened, but no more. Azazel said in a stern tone before looking back at Harry in the eyes. We will see, Harry replied back with a straight face. He would take the man's words for now. Azazel nodded at him before disappearing. The green-eyed young lord sighed before walking back toward Gasper, Issei, and the others. Internally, Harry hoped that the remaining fallen angel leader would keep his promise, or else he would have the great honor of being introduced to Harry's wrath. Time skip. Harry had his back pressed against a tree as he watched the leaders of the three factions, Michael for the angels, Azazel for the fallen angels, and finally Cerzex for the devils. Rias had inquired Gasper to stay behind in case he suddenly lost control of his power, and the damper accepted. When he saw the sad look on the girl-like boy's face, Harry cheered him up by promising him to give him anything he wanted, which succeeded. Harry was still shocked at himself of how quickly he became attached to Gasper, and couldn't help but reminding of Asia, whose bonds formed just as quickly. Well, who was he to say anything? As if it wasn't enough, Harry discovered that the wielder of Albion was the last descendant of the original Lucifer. The wielder in question was a young man with dark silver hair and hazel eyes who wore wearing a dark green V-neck shirt with a high-collared black leather jacket over it. He also had burgundy jeans with a silver chain drooping down over them, and black leather chaps with 3 bands encircling his right calf, and black shoes with black buckles. How ironical, Draig and Albion, 2 strong rivals, were at Kuo and none of them could fight. Harry couldn't help but laugh at how funny it sounded, as he was sure that the 2 heavenly dragons were not really enchanted by this. Anyway, so far the meeting was good, and Harry got to meet Michael personally. He was a handsome-looking man with long blonde hair and green eyes who was wearing a red robe with a gold cross on the front of his white alb. He also had golden shoulder plates with a white sash and a golden halo set above his head. He had asked him some question, and Michael had responded him as best as he could. One of those questions was about his little sister in all but BLD Asia Argento. Apparently, he allowed the former nun to be cast out of the church to preserve the religious faith of the Christian people, and by doing so, not risk the safety of heaven. After God's death, the seraphs activated heaven's system, and since then Michael was the one who became the supervisor, taking his creator's place. Harry admired the man's loyalty for the God of the Bible, as Michael did everything he could to maintain Christianity while leading the angels and guiding the church. In addition, Michael didn't have any prejudice toward the other 2 factions, unlike some other angels from heaven. It was those type of people Harry admired. Back to present, Harry, whose eyes were glued on the leaders, felt that someone was approaching him, and turned his head to see an extremely appealing woman with curly blonde hair and a voluptuous figure. She was wearing the same attire than Michael, and judging by the halo on her head, he assumed that she must be an angel. "May I help you, milady?" he asked her gently, as his eyes were now locked on hers, completely ignoring the meeting. "You may, noble sir," she replied back politely, but also with a hint of playfulness in her tone. "Am I looking for Death's nephew? I heard he was at this meeting. Can you take me to him, please?" Harry's eyes widened slightly at those words, but then smirked as he decided to have some fun. "Did someone give you a description of the guy in question?" he asked with an internal smirk. The appealing angel hummed in thought while saying out loud, "I did heard some things from the rumors. He is handsome, strong, have black hairs and emerald green dash." She instantly froze before finishing her words as her eyes widened comically. Grinning with amusement, Harry went into gentleman mode as he made a small reverence. "Peveril Harry, Death's nephew and young English lord. Pleasure to make your acquaintance, fair lady, and I heard you were looking for little old me." The green-eyed boy presented himself with a little grin on his face. The appealing girl's face turned red in embarrassment, but then it turned into a pout as she glared at him, earning a small snicker from the young lord, whose face turned back to a much more serious one. "Anyway, may I ask the reason why you wanted to see who, miss?" Harry asked the last part as he didn't know the name of his interlocutor. "Gabriel," the gorgeous lady responded to him with a kind smile and a strange glint in her eyes. At this simple name, Harry froze dead in his track as his eyes widened at her with shock. Why shouldn't he? He only knew of one angel with the name Gabriel, one of the 4 seraphs, the angel Gabriel herself. Seeing his reaction caused the gorgeous angel to giggle a bit in amusement before poking his name childishly. "You know it's not polite to stare," she inquired him with a sing-song voice which instantly broke his trance. "My apologies, milady. It's a great honor to meet you, Lady Gabriel. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Peveril, but you may just call me by my name. Only if you call me Harry. Gabriel nodded at the young lord with a smile which could melt any hearts. Harry and her shared a smile and were about to say more when suddenly, the green-eyed boy froze as an unknown smell reached his nose. Harry, are you okay? Gabriel asked him with concern as she watched him smelling the air. No, I smell trouble, he inquired to the angel with narrowed eyes. Are you Sir Dash? Gabriel began to ask before suddenly the air around them rejected a strange sensation. Harry understood it instantly. Gasper had used his power. What's going on? Gabriel asked the young lord with nervousness. I don't kn dash, he began to say before being interrupting himself when he saw a large group of people he never saw before appearing out of nowhere. He growled at the intruders threateningly and was about to confront them when a yellow magical circle emerged not far from the leaders where another intruder stepped out of it. It was a tall bespectacled woman with a voluptuous figure and tan skin along with long brown hair tied into a bun with a headset. In addition, she also had purple eyes and was wearing an extremely low-cut dress, and it had a high slit which exposed a large portion of her melons. Harry blushed at the sight of her melons and glanced around to see if Issei was staring at them and deadpanned when his suspicions was confirmed. Shaking his head, Harry looked back at the woman who was declaring that the era of Surzex, Michael and Azazel was over as she would kill them and replace Seraphol as the Satan Leviathan. At the last part, Harry froze as he felt nothing but pure anger. Gabriel, who was beside him, took a couple of steps back when she felt a strong killing intent coming from him. Her eyes widened when his arms found themselves covered with a dark mists while his eyes were glowing. How dare you, he screamed loudly to the unknown woman whose head turned away from the leaders to look at him. His friends, seeing the expression on his face, knew what was going to happen and took a couple of steps back while Akeno was getting aroused at the sight of her pissed boyfriend. Azazel and Michael were looking at the young man with wide eyes while Surzex couldn't help but sending a smirk toward the strange woman. After all, he had seen what Harry was capable of, and the green-eyed young lord was the one who defeated Kokobile not long ago. Stay out of this, boy. That doesn't concern you, the newcomer ordered him with a sneer on her face. Just as those words left her mouth, they all felt it, pressure. Many of them found themselves on their knees, even the leaders. Gabriel, who was standing near Harry, couldn't help but gap at the young man she was talking with a moment ago. Right now his body was covered with darkness as his eyes seemed like two glowing green orbs. I am not a boy. I am Harry Peveril, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, Emery's Lefay. Death's nephew. Harry snarled at the newcomer in a growl-like tone. The strange woman was completely pale as she stared at the shadowy figure with pure shock and horror. She had heard rumors about Death having a nephew but brushed them aside, thinking they were just that, rumors. But looked like she should have listened to them as she was facing him in the flesh. Now tell me, you piece of filth. What is your name so I can write it on your grave? Harry inquired her darkly as he advanced toward her and her army. Hundreds of people with magic from what the young lord could tell. I am Cateria Leviathan. Descendant of the original Leviathan. The woman responded back in fear as she stared at him with wide eyes. Cateria Leviathan, you try to hurt Seraphol, menace to kill people I saw as friends and family, Harry explained with a growl. Seraphol, who was beside Sona, blushed madly at how protective her boyfriend was of her, while Harry's friends smiled in appreciation for how loyal he was to them. Even Azazel and Michael had to admire this young man's loyalty despite having met the guy not long ago. Gabriel was also impressed by how protective of those he cared about and couldn't help but being attracted by him. Surzex, could you please put a barrier around the school? Harry asked the Mao Lucifer without turning his head away from Cateria and her army of magic users. Without waiting for the redhead's answer, Harry did something that shocked more than one. Between his hands, the green-eyed young lord created a massive ball of greenish energy which grew each time Harry spread his arms. Then he lowered the gigantic ball that had now 3 times his size. Above him while glaring daggers at Cateria, who couldn't move because of the pressure. For menacing my family, I sentence you to death. Goodbye. As those words left Harry's lips, he suddenly projected the gigantic ball right on Kateria, who screamed in agony as she was surrounded by a bright green light, a light that caused everyone present to quickly close their eyes as they didn't want it to become blind by it. They almost noticed that the ground was shaking just as the woman was screaming. When the light died down, the faction leaders along with Seraphol, Gabriel, Valley, Rias, Sona and their respective peerages saw with shock as the spot where Kateria was nothing but a large crater. However, Kateria wasn't the only victim of Harry's attack. Some of her magicians, those who were close to the woman, had also been destroyed. For some reason, they were also released from the pressure. The rest of Kateria's army backed away from the young man who was standing in front of the crater with his hairs covering his eyes, hiding his expression. We could hear nothing but silence as they all stared at the young lord with wide eyes of shock at what just happened. Michael and Azazel, along with Surzex, were in total disbelief at what they witnessed, and the redhead realized that Harry was much more powerful than he let on. The boys' friends and girlfriends were just as speechless. They knew Harry was powerful but not as much. Issei, who was beside Rias, couldn't help but being a bit jealous at the black-haired young lord's power. Asia looked at her Onizen with admiration while Gasper looked just as amazed. He had no seen Harry's abilities before, and now that he saw it, he couldn't help but admiring the young lord who had been nothing but kind to him. The magicians, who were shaking in fright at the sight of this young man killing their leader so easily, all froze in terror when young man turned his head to face them with glowing green eyes. "Now who's next?" Harry asked them with a dark grin which sent shivers down everyone's spines at the amount of malice behind it. The magicians, hearing this, all backed away in terror from the monster in front of them, but then they all stared in shock when they saw the young man closing his eyes while crossing his arms in a manner that looked like he was hugging himself, wondering at first what he was doing. The devils, the angels and the fallen angel then saw a strange light slowly forming on the boy's chest. Then without warning, Harry let out a loud battle cry which strangely sounded more like a roar as he violently spread his arms to his sides. What happened next shocked the spectators to the core. The light Harry had accumulated against his chest was released in the form of multiple photon shocks at high speed as a blinding light completely surrounds the area. Behind Harry, everyone turned their heads away but still could hear cries of shock, agony and terror coming from the magicians. Gabriel, as she was protecting her eyes from the light, decided to take a look and was amazed when she saw wings made of pure light attached on Harry's back. At this moment, she didn't know why, but she felt that she was in the presence of a deity. But soon she blinked when the light died down and her eyes widened in shock when she saw that a good portion of the magicians had been wiped out by this attack. She wasn't the only speechless at the sight, as Michael, Azazel and the devils were just as shocked by what just happened. After all, it's not every day you see someone destroying an entire army in a second. Even the heavenly dragons, Albion and Drake, were speechless. The red dragon knew that Harry powerful for a human, but DMN he didn't thought he was that powerful. Albion for his part made a mental note to ask more questions about this guy so his wielder would not challenge him. Gasper's eyes were shining as he looked at Harry and his admiration for the guy grew even more. Asia, well, it was the same. Seraphol and Akeno looked at their boyfriend with nothing but pure admiration as deep down they were internally happy to have such a strong man as theirs. Rias's queen, however, was also turned on by how merciless Harry was right now. The few magicians alive were staring at the young lord with nothing but terror as some of them were seen shivering in fright, shocked that a lone young man managed to destroy a whole army by himself. Live and never come back. Otherwise, I swore on my life, I will hunt every last one of you before ending your pathetic existence slowly and painfully. Harry growled at the magicians, who hastily nodded before disappearing as fast as they could, no wanting to anger him even more than he already was. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 8. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Asian Lionheart 310 on fanfiction.net. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.